All right, ladies and gentlemen. So we do have one more thing, one more piece we need to talk about during for our solving quadratics. This is one I left for a video because it's honestly the easiest way to solve. So we're still looking at a quadratic. We have x squared here, so it is still a quadratic, meaning it's the shape of a parabola. So we should be expecting two answers for it. But you'll notice that we don't have three terms in this problem. We only have the two terms. We have an x squared term and a constant term, but there's no bx term. There's no like plus 5x in the middle of this. We're not going to factor it the normal way. The nice part is what we can do is we can isolate x squared, so we can try to get this x squared by itself, and then we can take the square root. So that's all we're really trying to do with these. Um, so we'll go through that. This is going to be the only one that we don't solve equal to 0 first. So it's currently equal to 0, but our plan is to get this x squared term all by itself on the left side and then take the square root. So right now it's not all by itself because I have a negative 49 with it. I'm going to add 49 to both sides. When I do that, I'll end up with x squared is equal to 49. Okay. And then we're just going to take the square root of both sides. And if I take the square root of x squared, the square root of x squared is just x. That's what we're doing. We're trying to solve for x right now, so that's perfect. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And if I take the square root of 49, well, what times itself is 49? That's really what a square root is asking. So what times itself is 49? Well, hopefully you know that's 7. However, we are big boys and girls in Algebra 2, and we know that not only is it 7 squared that works, but also negative 7. So we're going to denote this with positive and negative 7. Plus or minus 7 is our final answer here. So both 7 and negative 7, if you plug them in, they would work. And those are our two solutions. But we expected two solutions, right, when we're seeing these. So that's not terribly surprising. So that's the gist of it. Get x squared by itself, and then take the square root of both sides. Some other things that might happen that you might see, something like this is pretty similar. We need to get x squared by itself. So whenever you're solving for x squared, we need to get our constant term out of there first. Add 25 to both sides. Sure, 4x squared equals 25. But it's still not by itself here because right now it says in 4x squared on the left. We don't want 4x squared there. We just want x squared, so I need to divide by 4 here. If I divide by 4 on both sides, x squared is equal to, well, let's just say 25 over 4. That's okay. We're okay with dealing with fractions. If you got a decimal here, honestly, that's okay too. But when they're kind of nice like this, we'll end up just leaving them as fractions, because the nice thing about taking the square roots of fractions, we can just take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom kind of independently and leave it as a fraction. So this is going to be x equals. We just took the plus or minus, or we just took the square root, so we know it's going to be plus or minus something. And then if I take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom, I will have 5 over 2. So this is our best answer. If you actually went and divided it out, that's okay. You would also get, what is this, 2.5. So if you had x equals plus or minus 2.5 here, that'd be an acceptable option too. And we're actually going to get quite a few decimal answers this unit. So I don't even mind if you do that. And more specifically, sometimes you have to use the decimal because the other options just aren't quite as good. So you might see that. Finally, speaking of, you might see something like this. So you might see something similar here. We'll buzz through and we'll do the same steps. I need to get rid of this 30 plus 30 plus 30, 5x squared equals 30. Yeah. We'll do the same thing and we'll actually be able to divide this one. If I divide by 5 on both sides, I get that x squared is equal to 6. But then when I go to square root both sides, well, I don't know the square root of 6. And frankly, it's not very nice. And we could leave this as a reduced square root. We could do some stuff to reduce it. This is the same as, well, the square root of 6 is actually all the way reduced, but we're going to get a decimal answer. So plug into your calculator. What is the square root of 6? And the square root of 6 is this value here, 2 point some stuff. remember that we're dividing, or we're writing all of our decimals to 2 decimal points. Since this says 2 point, this says 4494. And if we're rounding to the second decimal place, this 9 says round up, right? So we're going to replace all of this with 4 or 2.45. This is the last final answer here. So you'll actually round that one up, and this would be your best final answer. It's okay to get some decimals on here. If they work nice, they work nice. If you get decimals, you get decimals. But this is, once again, I think the easiest form of solving. You will definitely see 1 or 2 on your test at the end of the unit that has something like this, and this is the most straightforward way to do this. Yes, you could use the quadratic formula, but it would be kind of a pain in the butt compared to doing this. So hopefully that makes sense. Some of them might not be solved for 0 to start, but that's fine. We don't want them solved for 0 anyway. So just make sure you're moving everything away from your x squared term and then taking the square root when the x squared is all by itself. Okay, so today you are going to have some practice to do that covers what we did on Tuesday, which was factoring and then setting those factors equal to 0 and solving. It'll also ask you to do some quadratic formula stuff. Some quadratic formula stuff will undoubtedly come out to some square roots. So that stuff is good too. Why don't I'll throw a quadratic formula problem on here. So if you remember how to do the quadratic formula, you can pause the video and step away and start your work for the day. I just figure I may as well throw a quadratic formula problem at you just so you can kind of remember what we did on Tuesday, or if you missed Tuesday, it'll be a nice refresher. So the only other thing that you'll need to know for today, other than the factoring, which we practiced both Tuesday and I put a video out for before this, is what if it says 2 squared minus 7 minus, I don't know, 15. So I'm making this up. We'll probably get some nasty numbers, but that's okay. As a reminder, in case you didn't write it down yesterday, the quadratic formula says that x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you get this kind of messy formula, but as long as we write down what a, b, and c are, when we plug them in, it ends up being okay. If you look through here, our a value comes from whatever's with my x squared term. 2 is with my x squared term. So a is equal to 2. B is whatever's with my x term, so my b value is negative 7. It's really important to remember that we're taking the signs with it, especially on this problem right here. When we do c, c is negative 15, and that negative right there is extremely important, so please make sure you have that. So we get our a, b, and c from the things in my formula. Make sure it's all equal to 0 before you start looking for a, b, and c, otherwise you'll run into some issues. And then essentially all we're going to do is we're going to go plug this in. So it says, to start, it says negative b. Remember, this really means more like the opposite. It means more like the opposite of b. So in this case, it says negative b. I could write negative 7, but we don't really like to write that. We're just going to call that a positive 7. So positive 7 plus or minus the square root of, well, negative 7. Again, make sure you're using parentheses here, negative 7 squared. Those parentheses are super important because when you go to square it, it'll actually square that negative away. You'll use the calculator, so you won't really have to worry about it as long as you put it in with parentheses. And it says minus 4. That's just always a minus 4. It's a minus 4 every time. Times A. A was 2. And then it says times C, and C was negative 15. This is going to be all over 2 times A. 2 times A. A in our case was 2 as well. So it's going to be 2 times 2 down there. Great. So we do just need to go plug this in. I'm just using this formula off to the left to talk about and plug in all of these things. And then we're pretty much going to let the calculator do all the work. So My suggestion when you do this is to put this chunk right here, this chunk right here in your calculator without pressing the square root button yet. Yes, you'll likely be okay to press the square root button, but later, it's a good habit to get into because later it'll get a little tougher. So I'm going to plug in parentheses -7 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 2 parentheses -15. Make sure you're using parentheses. Make sure you are checking these out, typing it all in, and being pretty careful with your signs because they can throw you off. So I got 169, positive 169. So this all is the same as 7 plus or minus the square root of 169 all over. 2 times 2 is 4. So this is cool. And actually, wow, this problem worked out pretty nicely for us, even though I just made these numbers up. This is great. So what happens now is I try and take the square root of 169. Well, I can use my calculator. What is the square root of 169? And you might know that the square root of 169 is actually 13. So really what this means is that I have x is 7 plus or minus 13 over 4, which is great. Okay. Now, we don't want to leave it like that. It looks messy. It doesn't really tell me anything. We can get better than that. What this is really saying is, hey, one of these answers is 7 plus 13 over 4. Make sure you add the top before you do the division. Make sure you're careful if you just plug it into the calculator because 7 plus 13 is 20, and 20 divided by 4 is 5. So x equals 5 is one answer. Check. And then make sure you do the other one too. The other one in blue here. We also need to know what happens when I do 7 minus 13 over minus 13 over 4. Okay. Well, 7 minus 13 is actually -6 over 4. So our final answer is x equals, you can either write -3 over 2, or you could just say -1.5. At this point, we're going to be using decimals for this unit anyway, so you may as well get comfortable with the decimals, and that tends to be the easiest way to do it anyway. So that is -1.5. So you'll get two answers here. Sometimes when you do them with decimals, you won't get something quite as neat as 7 plus 13 and 7 minus 13. You might have a bigger decimal instead of that 13, but either way, you're going to add them together and divide to get two kind of clean answers. Okay, so that is everything that we've done this unit. That's everything that you need to know to be successful today and to take the quiz tomorrow. So as a reminder, you're going to do your practice today. Make sure you check your work on the key to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You have the whole hour to do this, so please make sure that you're being productive. And as always, don't give the sub any grief. I love to hear a good report when I get back. And then tomorrow, which is Friday, you will be testing or quizzing on this stuff. It's not a unit test. We still got quite a bit more to learn from this unit. So this is just kind of like a midway check-in. Hey, how we doing? So no stress, but do your best on it, and let's get something in the grade book that looks good for us. So yeah, shoot me an email if you have any questions, but hopefully I will be not answering most of them likely. So we'll see. And we can always take care of some stuff when we get back on Monday of next week as well. So no pressure this week, but please do your best to stay on top of everything and get after it. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week.